Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome to another Friday video here, but in part for a new film. This is also like a versus video in a way, similar to the ones that I did for Nosferatu versus Dracula in '92 earlier this year, and Dune versus Dune, both of which I will link to at the close of this video. As this one here is for kind of like a Toxie versus Toxie, meaning we have this new Toxic Avenger movie coming out. It's the first time since Citizen Toxie back in 2000, which was the fourth one, and a movie which, you know, definitely had some problems getting distributed, but seems to have been making some waves recently. The original was made in 1984. The last one, like I said, was made in 2000, and this newest iteration was actually made in 2023, but kind of sat unreleased for 2 years, considered to be unreleasable for some reason. But now we finally get it, and I got to see it, and here are some quick thoughts of mine on this. So first up, a refresher for those who haven't seen it in a while or never saw it. Very generic refresher, very quick one. Basically, we have, in the original, we have Melvin Junko, a janitor who's often bullied in the town of Tromaville. While working at the Tromaville Health Club, he's, you know, pranked in an extreme way, which ends with him trying to just get out of there and jumping out of this window to escape, landing headfirst into a barrel of toxic waste. This causes him to mutate into this toxic strongman of sorts, who now seeks to take out any of the bullies in the town, these gang members, drug pushers, and so on, as Tromaville has quite the crime issue. That was just for part one. You know, there were some other entries. I believe part two took place in Japan. We also have one where he's got a job on Wall Street trying to become like this yuppie to save up money for his blind girlfriend's eye surgery. And we even have like this alternate dimension version of him, if I recall correctly, from Citizen Toxie. So it had 4 films, really some strange stuff. All of these films are highly graphic in all sorts of ways, especially they are extremely violent in the acts that these criminals perform, highly graphic in how Toxie takes them out. Lots of nudity, lots of drug use, lots of bad behavior in general, and lots of stereotypes and slurs being kind of thrown around and made fun of. Something which, looking back, many, instead of laughing at, might take issue with, which, you know, is understandable. But while trying to explain this, the original film, at least, to somebody a couple weeks ago at one of our movie nights, he's asking for more info. It was kind of difficult to just kind of come right out and say what vocabulary our antagonists were using, as it's all very cancelable these days. But in the way that they were used in these films, it all makes sense, because combining the acts of violence that they're doing, the slurs and the stereotyping that these antagonists perform, it really makes you hate them and really want to kind of cheer on Toxie as far as how graphic he's going to be taking them out and avenging them. So that's like the overall gist. You know, they're rude, they're crass, nudity, gore, violence, stereotype jokes, lots of like, it's very low budget and everything. It's kind of like watching a movie that like a bunch of your friends made, and I've heard that kind of referenced that way before with a lot of the Troma films. You know, they're fun. You're not supposed to take them too seriously. So, you know, this new one though, before going in to see it, the marketing and speak was a bit vague going in. I'd heard it was a remake or a reboot, but the character is named Winston Goose instead of Melvin Junko. I'd seen bits of the trailers here and there, and you know, it kind of reminded me of the more recent Troma films, at least in the past 15 years. For ones like the later Nukem High movies or Poultrygeist or Shakespeare's Shitstorm, in that they were all still rude, crass, and graphic, in some ways worse than the older works. So I at least knew going in that this was going to be in the right spirit of those of the original film, and following a similar story in some ways. Though this time with Toxie, not just having this very welcome makeover, which helps this one kind of like stand out as its own thing, but Toxie's played, or, you know, Winston, I should say, is played, and Toxie's voiced by Peter Dinklage, of all people, from, you know, films such as Game of Thrones and the award-winning Knights of Badassdom. But with another little person, Luisa Guerrero, who's kind of playing Toxie in the costume, making him little. Again, this is all very standing out from what the first film and the following films were. So going in, I was excited to see where this was all going to go. And my thoughts comparing these two, kind of Toxie versus Toxie, well, this new one is a very different film. In my opinion, you really can't compare them. Different character in a different situation, even in a different town, referring to it as Saint Roma instead of Troma. though the S is always kind of obscured or falling off. And when it comes to being this toxic hero, he isn't as propped up as the hero in this one as much as in the original films. In this film, our protagonist, Winston, is a janitor at a kind of shady pharmaceuticals company, and he has this terminal brain issue, which they intentionally and comedically never really reveal the details to. His insurance doesn't cover it, and he kind of hatches a plan to find a way to kind of like steal some money to try to take care of himself. During this, he is accidentally turned into this toxic creature. Now, like the original, there are scenes which put him into this hero position, but there's a lot more in this one about this pharma company, about our lead's, his son and his partner of sorts, who's kind of like trying to take this company down because of some of the shady stuff they've been doing to the population. It looks and feels pretty different from the Troma films. I would say the closest feel and overall tone would be some older films like, maybe some of like the Nukem High movies, as I mentioned a little bit more, earlier. Definitely more polished, but not to like a Hollywood level. Better effects, but definitely not top of the line. Lots of gore thrown in. A bit of crass humor and some insensitive jokes here and there, but nowhere near as explosive as the original films. Now, however, this one is still a lot of fun. While they do spend a little more time on the origin story and setup than I would like, since I'm already familiar with it, I'm clocking in at what feels like a good 30 minutes or so, which I guess is on par for like an origin story. This origin does serve as a way to set up who these characters are in this world, emphasizing that this is not really as much of a remake as like a reimagining, a film inspired by what came before it. So it is a decent intro still overall to this Winston character, who his stepson is, the issues in their lives and in this town, and so on. Now, it does take a little bit to kind of get to the meat of the story, but once it does, it's similarly like frantic and chaotic as some of the previous iterations. We have this cool mop weapon which has been dipped in these caustic chemicals, taking out faces and tops of heads in all sorts of graphic ways. He's taking people out. Toxie being able to regenerate and has a lot of strength and everything as well. The best I can kind of describe this outside of just random, which is what it is it feels like if you took some older films like maybe RoboCop 2 and that old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, mash them together, slap some Troma humor on top, slash the budget a bit more so it still has that scrappy thrown together feel. Kind of hard to even explain what I'm talking about there. But again, it really is a lot of fun, but there will likely be a lot of hate for this film, coming from probably one of two things. Either one, those who really love the originals, and like they probably do with other remakes and reimaginings, they want to kind of feel how they did watching the original for the first time. They won't. They can't. It's not going to be like that. This is different. They're not going to like how different it is. Also, there may be some who just really aren't prepared. They have no exposure to Troma. They may go in not knowing really what to expect. Not knowing that it's supposed to be something that's very funny and violent. And, maybe they know a little bit about that, but not expecting the really random humor and the really cheesy stuff that's thrown in, and that they really shouldn't take this film too seriously. But I really think that if one understands that this one is simply a fun, gross, violent, and strange film, which, while not being quite the same as other Troma films, I would say is definitely heavily inspired by it, it's one to just have some silly fun with and not to take too seriously, they'll find it more than worth checking out. Speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out my latest video here for Toxie versus Toxie and what to expect. Like I said, it's really hard to compare them. I still would say I do like the originals better, probably because of nostalgia, probably because I have 4 films worth of that Toxic Avenger to kind of look back on versus just this single one, which is very fresh in my mind as I just saw it last night. But at any rate, the Toxic Avenger is available on several platforms right now, but I would recommend the Troma Now app. I believe it's only about $5 a month. I think I bought the whole year for $50, but they do have a lot of coupons pretty much every time you go to the Troma Now website for either a free week or a free month. It's definitely worth checking out, not just those original Toxic Avenger movies, but the class of Nukem High, Poltergeist, Shakespeare's Shitstorm, Sergeant Kabuki Man. There's a lot of really cool, funny, gross, shocking kind of stuff on there that's definitely, worth giving it a watch. Also coming up in just a moment, I'm editing in 2 older videos of mine from a few years back. These are my initial trips to kind of revisiting Tromaville after years not watching any of their stuff. So those will be edited in just a moment, so be sure to check those out. And at the end of that, be sure to like, subscribe, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. I got a strange one here for you for an entry which will hopefully turn into more than one entry. So as I begin my trip to Tromaville. So for those unfamiliar, Troma at the time of this video is the longest running independent film company in North America, with a slogan on their site stating that they're crossing 48 years of disrupting media. So they had some sexy comedies back in the 70s, a new kind of warped and mutated superhero in the Toxic Avenger in the 80s, and they continue to kind of push the limits throughout the 90s and even currently through today. If I had to kind of sum up what my experience has been so far, with checking these out, is I would say twisted, disgusting, and intentionally fun, low-budget horror and 50s sci-fi inspired films. It's a whole mouthful there. But if you have any familiarity, you would at least likely know of the Toxic Avenger, or maybe even the class of Nukem High. But perhaps you know about Romeo and Juliet, or Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD, or even Poultrygeist. So in a previous video of mine, the reason why I kind of came across this, I did this video for VHS Massacre and VHS Massacre 2, which was distributed by Troma Films. And I saw some interesting interviews with one of the founders, the man, the myth, the legend, Lloyd Kaufman. And it really got me kind of thinking about, these films that I hadn't seen in a long time, and that there were a lot of titles that I'd just never gotten around to seeing. I'd seen Toxic Avenger and I'd seen Class of Nukem High, like way back in the day. And I'd been meaning not just to kind of revisit those, but to kind of explore like all these other ones in the catalog that I'd kind of, never got around to over the years. So, one of the reasons why I missed out, of course, as stated in the VHS Massacre documentaries, was because of these big VHS rental companies that were not only refusing to carry Troma films, but they were pushing those smaller mom and pop places out of business that did hold those films. So it's getting, harder and harder to even track down any of the films that they had to offer because of like the rental industry kind of being taken over by the big giant companies. So when I decided to check these out again, I debated getting like a free 1-week trial of their Troma Now app, which is their site and their app where they have all of their content. But I decided against it because I looked at what was on there. There was so much content. I just went ahead and just signed up for a full month because it's only $5 anyways. I figured, let me just unlock this for an entire month, see what I can dive into and enjoy, and that way I don't feel rushed to try to check out too much in 1 week. But before I continue and go into, much more detail on this, let me just make something clear with some of the terminology that I'm going to be using. Terms like low budget or cheap, cheesy, really disgusting or gross, vomit-inducing, and offensive. All of these terms I use in a very endearing way. These films contain a lot which can very easily be categorized using one of those terms, and it is intentional and it's wonderful because these aren't your big budget Hollywood conglomerate mega productions, and they don't pretend to be. In fact, they even make a lot of sarcastic jokes about those large companies and those giant productions and the franchises that they run. Even though Lloyd Kaufman himself did show up in a little film called Guardians of the Galaxy, seeing as it was directed by James Gunn, and James Gunn along with his brother Sean Gunn, who were, in these Guardians of the Galaxy movies and directing them and working on them, that also worked with Troma in the past, with Sean Gunn actually being in Romeo and Juliet. That's where I first came across him. A little indie film that I worked on called The Auteur Theory. He was on it as well. We kind of considered him our star because he was on the cover of a Troma DVD. But anyways, now that long introduction is out of the way, what this video is about, it's basically what Troma is, and this is like my first week or two kind of exploring their catalog. So, as I said, I'd seen a Toxic Avenger and the Class of Nukem High way back in the day, but little did I know they made more of them, many more of them. So, what was the experience like kind of rewatching those two entries I'd seen and exploring the ones that I hadn't? Well, it was great. I mean, it really was amazing fun, especially because as I was kind of tweeting about what I was watching with other people that I know on Twitter, Lloyd Kaufman himself was even interacting with me. He was liking stuff, commenting on it, sharing and quoting tweets and everything. And that also brought in a lot of interaction from other Troma fans who were then commenting with some of their favorite titles and other suggestions of ones to check out. It was like really supportive that just because I was checking this out and tweeting about it, everybody wanted to get on top of that and be like, oh, well, you got to check out this one, you got to check out that one, this one right here is great. It was really cool. So anyways, for Toxic Avenger specifically, a quick and dirty synopsis for this franchise would be in the town of Tromaville, a scrawny guy, this is Tromaville in New Jersey, a scrawny guy is bullied, he's teased a lot and mocked, and he ends up falling into a barrel of toxic waste. This kind of mutates him into New Jersey's first superhero, the Toxic Avenger. That's pretty much all you need to know, and no, it's not based on a true story. But he spends the film basically just killing bad guys who are terrorizing the citizens of Tromaville. Massive violence takes place against some very deplorable bad guys. And I mean bad. They are racist, sexist, homophobic, and murderous. They really set these guys up to be bad. So bad that the disgusting ways in which our titular hero dispatches them, I could easily cheer along with. Because you want to see how these bad guys are taken out. You want to see what kind of gets them because they are so horrible. So you put up with all that grossness because it's kind of funny seeing them, get what they deserve. So, the film has a very retro and low budget look, of course, because of when it was made. And it looks a little bit more like if just like a whole bunch of friends or family just, got together and tried to make this twisted movie, just having some fun with it. And it really works great. It's a lot of fun. We get graphic violence, graphic gore, we get a lot of nudity, we get sexual assault, we get offensive language, we get all this to go along with what is not only a truly disgusting film, and again, I mean that in the best possible way, but one that surprisingly has quite a bit of heart in it. You actually care about what's going on with these characters and, everybody who made this movie. And there were sequels. Part 2 I really enjoyed. This one involves Toxie going to Japan by way of windsurfing, which one does, to search for his long-lost father and getting mixed up in some of the crime happening over there. My only issue with that, of course, is that I missed Tromaville. I missed the Tromaville and the citizens and everything happening there. But then in part 3, which I loved as well, we get back into Tromaville. Most of it taking place, directly in Tromaville, where Toxie gets involved with this evil corporation to try to make some money for an eye surgery for his girlfriend who is blind. He turns into basically like the most disgusting bad guy himself, kind of getting corrupted in the process, and he becomes an 80s style uber capitalist New York yuppie. I told you it was horrible. It's really sad, but don't worry, it all works out in the end. And then down the line, years later, we get part 4, Citizen Toxie, which was more recent, of course. This is from 2000, and another one kind of keeping within Tromaville and involving this alternate reality of like these doppelgangers which come through and must be defeated. Another one that's really a lot of fun, and it does not hold back on any of the grossness or anything that led those first 3 films our way. All 4 of these were really a lot of fun. Some of them were covered on a video saw about a week before I got into these by Minty Comedic Arts, which I will link to in the description, which goes into a lot more detail about the Toxic Avenger, including a cartoon spin-off called the Toxic Crusaders, which I've yet to check out, but that also is on the Troma Now app, so I'm going to be queuing that up soon. So, of course, the first one I would say is the best, but I think that's just because of nostalgia, and you get that origin when everybody's kind of first introduced. It's a lot of fun, but they were all a lot of fun as well. But I didn't watch them all in a row. I kind of mixed them in with the Class of Nukem High films, of which there are 5 entries for those. So here's some quick info about Class of Nukem High. Nuclear waste is contaminating school, and especially like this drug supply that the kids are purchasing off of some of these factory workers at the nuclear power site, and weird stuff happens. It's hard to really even say much more than that because it's a bit more random. Like the Toxic Avenger, I remember vaguely certain scenes about this from back in the day, but it had been so long that most of it I'd forgotten. It feels a little bit less centralized and linear in its storytelling than the Toxic Avenger did, but it feels more like a random ensemble of strange situations kind of stitched together into the story, but we get some really cool, gross stuff in that as well. The second one, even more so with the craziness, but the second one starts to focus a little bit more on a specific character or two. So it's got a little bit more direction, because of these characters that get a little bit more screen time over the rest of the cast. But yeah, so those were for the second 2. So those first 3 were a lot of fun, but like, Toxie, I kind of gravitated more towards the first one for the same nostalgic reason. Years later, like several years later, we got a new sequel to the first one. They basically ignored parts 2 and 3 and just did another sequel to part 1, called Return to Nukem High Volume 1. This is where things really get strange, and not just in the gross and offensive stuff kind of thrown in, but in the film itself. So compared to the previous ones, this one and the sequel a few years later, the Return to Nukem High Volume 2, I'm getting the title right, the filming techniques were different. Everything looked a lot more polished. There was even some CG thrown in to kind of enhance some of the scenes. So it had a very different look than the earlier works, not just for Classic Nukem High, but for previous stuff that I'd seen in Toxic Avenger. But it was almost like that clarity of the film kind of made all those disgusting effects really stick out a whole lot more. And then the CG was used to push it even further, stuff that you just wouldn't be able to do practically. To say that the 5 Nukem High films were an interesting journey would be a great understatement. They pushed and pushed, and the limits, they pushed and pushed the limits, and they went further than expected, even given the previous films. But these films, like the 4 Toxie ones as well, they need to be viewed with the right mindset, I feel like. If you decide to check these out, the biggest ideas to keep in mind are they are intentionally cheesy and silly. They are intentionally as gross and as offensive as possible. It feels like the production is a group of friends or family just having fun putting together the wildest scenarios they can to tell some of the strangest stories. There'll be parts of the films and certain entries that you really love and enjoy. There'll also be some that kind of fall flat, and that's all right. But just go in with an open mind, go in open-minded and interested in seeing something very strange that, something like you've never really seen before, and just have fun, like I did. All of these are available on one platform or another. I've seen, I think Night Flight has some, and I believe Tubi does have some of the entries as well for free. It's all ad-based. But really the Troma Now app is where it's at, because like I said, they offer like a free week, sometimes they have a free month, but a month is only $5. So if you do decide to pay for it, it's very little money to get in there and hop in and just start checking out some of those films. And speaking of checking out, thanks for checking out this latest little video of mine, which would be the first involving Troma. Let me put in a little bit more here because I forgot a few things. So, I checked out some other titles such as Tromeo and Juliet, Poultry Guys, Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD. So I do plan on doing some videos about those as well. So there'll definitely be a second installment to this. But I just had the pleasure of actually meeting Lloyd Kaufman at the time of this video. This would be yesterday. This past weekend at the Spooky Empire Mayhem convention out in Orlando. So quick word on that before wrapping this up. First off, the experience was great because they set up this room that also had some of the cast of the Terrifier films in there, and Lloyd's Corner was pretty packed. There was a lot of people kind of filling in that corner, and with everybody in line there, it just felt like you're hanging out with a bunch of friends who somehow you'd never met before. Like, we all enjoy this weird stuff, so we got that major thing in common, and you're able to have some really great conversation and meet some great people. Lloyd himself was very kind and funny. He's signing everything, posing for all these pictures, handing out free month coupons for Troma Now to try to promote that. And the Troma team working the booth and organizing the line and kind of keeping everybody, up to speed of what's going on. They were amazing as well. They were really a fun group of people who were great to spend some time with, and I really hope that I get to see them again at another event. But by the end of the day, I ended up buying this shirt. Of course, I got this bumper sticker I'm going to put on the back of my car soon. And I even got this set of all 4 of the Toxic Avenger movies signed by him. And I also got this cool Toxic Crusaders metal plaque that I had Lloyd sign. And it was interesting because nobody there had seen them because they were so old or whatever, but some vendor out on the floor had them, and I bought the last one. It was totally worth it, so I got that signed as well. But yeah, it was really great to meet everybody there. They really are awesome. So of course, when I came home, that's when I decided to queue up Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD, but that will be in another video, and yes, it's just as weird as that title sounds. But anyways, back to a quick summary to get back to my speaking of checking out kind of ending. Funny, gross films with some interesting stories. Always pushing the limit, working with a very low budget, so there's a lot of heart and hard work kind of poured into all these titles. It is not for everyone. I definitely understand that. And even if you like many of them, I'm sure there'll be some titles that don't land as well, while other ones you'll absolutely adore, hopefully. Basically, Troma is very worth checking out if you want something very different and entertaining, made by a group of awesome people for quite the eclectic and fun fan base. So that's about all that I have for this entry. I know it's a little bit longer than usual, even though I said to be quick at the beginning. But anyways, just want to thank you for sticking around to the end. Be sure to subscribe and hit that little bell icon to get notifications when I put up new content, which is usually once or twice a week. Do the whole, like, comment, share. All that stuff really helps out quite a bit. And I will see you in the next one. Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back. I'm back finally with another installment, another trip to Tromaville. If you haven't seen my first video on Troma, be sure to check that out. But for a very quick little intro for Troma. So anyways, Troma has been around for about 50 years, and it's one of the longest running indie film companies, which has made some very interesting films, let's say. They've been categorized in many ways, such as disgusting, offensive, strange, disturbing, and disruptive. But in my previous video, I covered revisiting the Toxic Avenger and Class of Nukem High, which came about after watching the documentary VHS Massacre. So be sure to stick around to the end of the video if you want to see the link to my previous Troma video and the one for VHS Massacre and VHS Massacre 2. While revisiting them, Toxic Avenger and Class of Nukem High, I ended up checking out the rest of them, all the sequels that they had, which I'd never seen before. I've had a very good time, with this content, and an even greater time getting to meet Lloyd and a lot of the Troma team and several Troma fans at the Spooky Empire Mayhem convention a few months back. So, right when I got home from that convention, I kind of dived back in to check out more of their content, and that brings us to this video where I touch on 5 other films that I've checked out. So here we go. For the first one, Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD. The synopsis is a streetwise New York police officer transforms into the world's most unusual superhero. So this one feels like just pure comedy over anything else. Probably the funniest and cheesiest of the films I've checked out so far. I mean, this man literally just turns into a Kabuki Man to fight crime. There's a lot of fun in this one. It's very light, and I could even see purchasing the Blu-ray one day to kind of have on hand, like I did with the Toxic Avenger films, just to kind of add it to the collection and everything, just so I can own my own edition. Second one of these is Tromeo and Juliet. The synopsis is: Tromeo, a filmmaker, falls in love with Juliet, the daughter of a former partner who tried to steal his business from him. This is written in part by James Gunn and stars, among others, Sean Gunn. Now, I'd worked on the auteur theory with Sean, and we considered him to kind of be a star on that set, among others, like Rachel True was in that as well, and Natasha Lyonne and Armin Shimmerman. But since he was like in a Troma film, and many of us on the crew had seen a few Troma films growing up, we really considered him to kind of like be our star. As for this title, Tromeo and Juliet, I mean, I think it was alright, but I think I need to do a rewatch of it. I've had issues recently remembering character names when I'm watching something. It's some sort of memory issue left over from COVID, which is slowly getting better, but that's another story that has nothing to do with movies at all, much less with Troma. So anyways, if you're familiar with Romeo and Juliet, like plays, remakes, reimaginings, inspired works, different films and everything, the names are very important to the story. So if you're losing track of what's going on between those two sides, it's kind of hard to follow. But, I thought this one was okay, even though I was having a hard time remembering the names and really getting into it. I am going to do a rewatch of this one someday because it definitely seemed like it was put together well, and it did have some funny beats throughout. Third one is Troma's War. Synopsis for this one: a group of assorted Americans survive a plane crash in a Caribbean island and discover it is infested with crawling snakes and other venomous beasts. Even worse, terrorists are preparing a full-out war on America with a biological weapon. So that sounds crazy, right? It is. It feels like total 80s action parody with a slathering of Troma on top. Lots of violence, lots of gore, some nudity. We get tons of action in this, and some really absurd characters and situations. Definitely worth checking out. Fourth one on this is Poultrygeist, The Chicken Dead. This one is a serious drama. No, I'm kidding. This one I could not take serious in any way, and I mean that in a really great way. This one was incredibly strange and fun, kind of like horror comedy of sorts. Lots of really gross stuff in it going on. Crazy stereotype jokes, really silly concepts. There's even a musical number that they throw into this one. And this is the film where, as you may have seen in my previous Troma video, but I'll report here. Robbie Vamps, I met her during this while waiting in line. She's wearing this costume, inspired by the movie. And I will link to her Instagram in the description if interested. And speaking of which, every time I see a picture of her now on Instagram, it looks strange because I met her with a beak on. So it's kind of weird for me to see that she has a real human face underneath that. Very awesome person, and it was a very awesome time in that line. You spent some time with her and all the other Troma fans, and this film, Poltergeist, was a lot of fun. Really strange stuff worth checking out. But finally, Father's Day. So the synopsis for this one, which is film number 5 on this list, is a murderer, a priest, and a delinquent try to bring down a father-killing madman. So this one, which I watched on Father's Day, so it's been a little while, was perhaps, well, I'll say it definitely is the strangest and grossest of the Troma films I've seen so far. There is graphic detail on these killings that this madman has been doing. Tons of violence. I know I've said that on previous installments, but this one really goes over the top, especially with the gore. They throw in a lot of nudity as well. Got a little bit of like comedy thrown in, but it's mainly just this really gritty, violent gore film that is truly bizarre and strays in directions one can likely not even guess. And while I was enjoying it thoroughly the entire time, just overall the entire film, part of me was watching it simply in amazement of the weird craziness that they were throwing in our faces. And it was just a really interesting journey as that story had unfolded. And in fact, it was so strange and so bizarre and so gross, I decided afterward to take a little break from some Troma for a bit, get back into some other films for a little while, kind of reset the brain and keep me from this level of insanity, because once I go down that Troma rabbit hole, I stay in those rabbit holes for a while, hence why I watched 4 Toxic Avenger movies and all of the Class of Nukem High, Return to Nukem High films within about a 1 or 2 week period. But anyways, there you have it. Those 5 films. You got our Romeo and Juliet, Troma's War, Poltergeist, The Chicken Dead, got Father's Day, and the one that I feel is the most accessible and the most fun and, just overall a great time, that's Sergeant Kabuki Man, NYPD. But what are your thoughts if you've seen any of these? Or Troma in general? Are there any specific titles that you are a fan of and would recommend? Go ahead and leave a comment down below and let's get that conversation going. If you have not seen any of these and have the curiosity, head on over to Troma Now, to the Troma Now app, and sign up. They usually have like some free trials for either a free week or a free month, and even on top of that, it's only like $5 a month anyways. So, pop in, check some out, and see what you think. Anyways, that's all I got for this quick little video here. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a like, and if you're not already subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Hit that little button and then like the little bell somewhere on there. And typically I cover a lot of like horror stuff and older 80s films, or you can just check out some of the back catalog and see if this is a channel that you'd want to subscribe to, and check out more of my content, share it all around, and stick around to the end, which I'm thanking you for right now because it really does help out quite a bit. Anyways, that's all I got for this one, and I will see you in the next one.